There is a lot of space in here.
Isn't the truth?
There's a bunch of spacey people in here.
You always get all
Well, here's one more, bud.
We like
One
lots
more
of space,
bud?
don't we? Don't we like lots of space? Don't we like lots of space?
I don't know.
Yeah, feels pretty comfortable here.
There you go.
With the Woody's on. Like everyone but these section.
Maybe a lot of people left.
Yeah, they got scared.
This happens. It's Super
They're still
Bowl
waiting for
Sunday
their
after
coffee.
all.
They're waiting for their coffee. That new season.
Serious people always leave sooner.
You don't never know what's going to happen with these apparitions, you know?
That's right.
They just do what they do.
Yes, Pat.
What does it mean to be not apparition?
It's good.
An emanation. What does it mean to be an emanation? You said that, I've heard it for years, Chenrezig is an emanation of Amitabha.
Yeah.
But what does that mean exactly?
Well, there's, I mean, just to say the slightly humorous side of that is the reason that we always say the same thing is because we don't actually know what the first thing meant. I mean, it is perhaps a specialty of the Vajrayana. So when we say that Chenrezig is an emanation of Amitabha Buddha, what's meant there is that in a certain way, Chenrezig arises through the auspices, you might say, or through the means of Amitabha. So emanations are also said to arise from other beings other than Buddhas, but really they may be talking about Buddhas when we talk about an emanation. How it happens, you'll have to send a letter to Amitabha, I think. What that means. But one way, what we do is we work with each other, kind of collaboratively, and in a group and a sangha, and good things emanate from that. When things are going well, then positive things emanate from that, and we know what that means. It means that some group of people is working together, and they share the same vision, and they overcome their difficulties, and they manifest something good, and we could call that manifestation an emanation of sorts. And if you take it out of the kind of the mechanical way that I just said, you could imagine it from the perspective of something slightly more meaningful, but less mystical. For example, the Dalai Lama may have a very close student, right? Like the Karmapa. And maybe at some point, then after the Dalai Lama, the Karmapa, I'm just giving this as an example. This is nothing but just an off-the-cuff example. Change all the names because everybody's already innocent. So you could imagine the Dalai Lama's gone for some period of time, and the Karmapa just becomes known as an emanation of the Dalai Lama. Those sort of things, I think, historically happen like that. And what the mechanism is and why that happens is a mystery to me. But great beings often spawn great students.
But
You know?
in that, but Chenrezig is insubstantial. It's not
The
like
what?
Chenrezig is not like the Karmapa. I mean, the Karmapa is someone I can go up and
Yeah, I know.
do that to, and
Yeah.
well, I mean, I mean,
How
I
do you
did.
know how do you know Chenrezig is not like that?
Yeah.
Well, because I've never been able to.
Well, how does it feel when you do that?
Well, I guess it just seems like Karmapas has some substance.
So the
And-
last time you poked Karmapa, you told her,
Yeah, how'd that go?
Well, I mean, he touched my mala. Like, I didn't poke him. But so I'm having. I mean, it feels like an emanation of an emanation of. I mean, you know, it's like everything is
Oh.
really, really insubstantial.
Well, so are you.
Yes, I
So-
know, but I don't think of myself that way, unfortunately.
Well, maybe Amitabha doesn't either. If he thinks of himself at all.
or you.
Me, I know you know what I'm talking about, though. I mean,
Well, I know the
Playing
confusion
with me.
behind the concept because it's both intriguing and frustrating at the same time. And but the reason I made those examples was because I think that we have some sense of what's being pointed at. That's all. Just some sense of it. It's often the case that groups of people do great things. You know, like even in science, for example, like we saw the thing with the whole DNA thing where science around the world collaborated in order to put together the human genome. Whatever you think of DNA and the human genome, the collaboration effort was the first time ever that anything like that had ever been done. So it just shows that a collaboration sometimes results in extraordinary things. And I think in a certain way, in a mystical sense, you could pick another word for it, but I think collaboration happens there sometimes in ways that we don't normally think are even possible. Collaboration before one is born into this world, maybe, or on the way to, those sort of things. We don't normally even ponder those things, but one can certainly ask the question and entertain oneself with the question. Is it possible? Do things... I always have this sense of, if I can think of it, it's somewhere it is.
Yeah.
I always have that sense, like not 100%, but I think really, if I think somebody has green hair that they didn't dye, that it came up natural, probably somewhere somebody has green hair. If I can imagine it, it's probably somewhere. And if there is an Amitabha Buddha, then it's an extraordinary Buddha. And an extraordinary Buddha will do things that my kind of bounded mind will not understand.
Are there Buddhas that are not extraordinary? I mean, I would think it's an oxymoron.
You think you're going to corner me with that cheap shot?
I wasn't trying to corner you.
Anyway, the pie was good. It was an emanation of Linda.
She didn't even know
Pardon me?
it. You didn't even know it.
That I'm an emanation of an emanation?
I think it's a great question to ponder.
Yeah, yeah.
And I don't know. Bill, Dora, have you ever heard of anything that elaborates or clarifies this more?
Just starting from a different place, this sense that there's Buddha nature, we talk about that's what there is, and it manifests as everything. So, to me, that's emanating.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where it's not, and so, and then when we have a form, something like Amitabha, then we're really looking at our way of relating to the purity of Buddha nature, and so from that, the emanation, because we see good and bad, we sort of we have to look at emanations of good from, so, because we decide Amitabha is like trying to increase our sense of purity and goodness.
Yeah.
And then anything that's we could say all the enlightened ones are emanating out of that pure Buddha nature. So in that sense, who's emanating from who doesn't matter so much.
Yeah,
It's
right.
more that they all are coming out of pure compassion, pure emptiness, pure, just enlightened mind, Buddha nature. So that's where I go.
I think it all becomes clear when we see directly into the nature of appearance emptiness.
Wow.
I assume so.
Okay, I guess what
That's
we
my
look forward
speculation.
to.
Yes. And along with that, I think interdependence becomes completely clear too.
Well, I think the way I'm kind of holding it right now is I realize that my sense of myself is so ephemeral.
So what?
So ephemeral. I mean, it's like I want to think it's not, but when I really look, I just know that it's like just kind of an imagination. So I think from that I can kind of move into contemplating what you were talking about.
Yeah.
I don't know. Somehow that gives me a little foothold in there.
It's a very nice thing to ponder. It's like what I think I know from my own side. What I would like is the truth, and I imagine the truth is something that is comprehensible. I mean, comprehensible.
Mm-hmm.
Like I can comprehend what it is. Sometimes that's a derailment.
Mm-hmm.
Like it isn't comprehensible at whatever. It's kind of like easy math is difficult when you're 2 years old,
Yeah.
not comprehensible. And later it seems really simple. And in a certain way, there's part of me with the Dharma that feels like that. Like there are things which are easy to understand, and other things which are not comprehensible. And I remember Kala Rinpoche talking about this, that part of what you need to do as a student of the Dharma is you need to find the things, he didn't use these words, but you need to find the things that are comprehensible, because that's where you get your confidence from. So your own experiences and teachings of the Dharma that you can comprehend, which is different for different people. You find it, and then you can rely on that. And the really kind of deep stuff will gradually just come to pass by virtue of working with the things that you clearly understand, because the entire Dharma can be extrapolated from relatively small and simple things. Much in the same way as like very complex mathematical stuff happens from simple pieces. But you can't fake it. You can't go there without the prerequisites. It really has to be there. Time on the cushion, certain practices sometimes, a lot of pieces. And I think from my perspective, I never feel like I know what will work for somebody. That you can share the methods and some experiences, but actually each person has got to find that. In the end, they got to find it on their own. And by the end, I don't mean enlightenment. I mean just like the next thing. Somebody else can't do it. It's like they can tell you, you go to the corner and turn left. and you can translate that into, they can tell you this is how you practice Nundro, but actually you have to do it in order for it to work. No matter you received it directly from the Buddha's mouth, you still got to do it. Unfortunately.
Thank you.
Pat, was that, let's see, you started that, didn't you?
It's fine.
Fine.
It's just fine.
There's a sense that it's over,
It,
that topic.
the topic?
I had a thought
It's
about
just
it.
beginning.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, maybe we could also think of these appearances as apparitions, as emanations, of ourselves.
Emanations of ourselves.
Yeah, so if these are all apparitional forms, then we could call them emanations of ourselves. And, yeah, maybe. Maybe that's an emanation. Or maybe this is also an emanation.
I think there's you might be cheating yourself. In one regard. Well, it occurs to me that there are certain hierarchies that are functional. They're not thinking of hierarchies as like human hierarchies, but hierarchies in terms of understanding that are maybe helped by thinking about them in certain ways. So, for example, if I think of the Buddha Amitabha without any emanations, just the Buddha Amitabha, and I think, well, the characteristics look like this, I very quickly have the sense that I understand the words that describe the characteristics of the Buddha, but actually, I don't get it. It's language that I can kind of understand, but I also have a sense that I don't really know what this is. I can say the words. So if I now, I think I totally agree with you in one way. We could call all of our apparitional bodies that come into practice an emanation, but now we're going to have to dream up something else for the emanation from the Buddha, which is perhaps an order of magnitude different. It's not the same. So I'm inclined to not use the word emanation.
Okay.
With when I think of Chenrezig, I'm not thinking there's an emanation of Chenrezig. But it may not be entirely wrong to say that. I just don't want to put myself in the place of being responsible for that, aside from my intention and my aspiration. I can do that. And if Chenrezig appears because I intend and I imagine it, that's great. But personally, I find it more useful to acknowledge that the reason Chenrezig appears is because of my relationship with my teachers and the lineage. And if that relationship didn't exist, then it would never even occur to me to have anything like that. So I just find that useful in terms of maintaining the lineage. If I have a good Chenrezig practice, and I think here again, I'm the beneficiary of the gift from the lineage, then it's helpful for me in terms of my relationship with the lineage and others. It's strictly a matter of language. That's all it is. So language that puts me in the driver's seat. I can feel exalted by virtue of that, but it's short term. It's like the next thing I know is I find myself saying to myself, do you see what you just did? It's kind of subtle. ahead.
It seems though that there is a bit of usefulness between us being emanations briefly and what Dora was saying about the Buddha nature and everything. Because when I was dissolving what we had created with Chenrezig, and it went back to this light. It was like, and Chenrezig dissolved into me, merged with me. It's like, and the ocean of everybody else. And it was a way to access, it was a way to give myself, it was like a way for a reason to believe, yeah, that really might be true, that we all do have awakened nature. And so not really thinking of it in a long term, but just even blipping on it, just short hit of that helps dissolve the boundary between my relative reality and the ultimate. It just kind of helps that start to dissolve. So when dissolving the visualization tapped into that, just this conversation taps into it too. So it seems to have a use in that way.
Yeah, I think that's good. That's good. You know, we can carry this beyond usefulness, including I point the finger at myself on that. I always have this sense personally that when I catch myself being too sure of something, a desire arises immediately out of habit. Let that go. And I don't always succeed in that, at least not quickly. But I can make a very strong case for that, which I think is actually not useful. Because a strong case can be conceptually really compelling, but actually counterproductive. Because thinking that that's what needs to be done, or that X is the truth of that thing, is actually stepping maybe in the wrong direction. Belief itself may feel like it is a support for certain experiences, but the experiences may arise by virtue of the belief rather than the realization. So there's like traps in there. And I think I'm overly sensitive to all of that. And so I also then don't want to say too much about what you should do or shouldn't do. I'm more inclined to think, are you like on track? I mean, wavering is like the norm. It's a good norm. I step to the right and I think, yeah, good. And then a little while later, a little more experience, and I realize, I stepped a little too far to the right. Maybe I should. We're like running the experiment continuously. What is that awakened nature? If I hold that fully confident, that didn't help me at all. I realized, I don't know what it is, so it doesn't help me to do anything other than there's something that is maybe inherently there for sentient beings, and we call it the nature of mind, or we call it the pure mind, and all sorts of things. But actually, none of those things give me any support for anything. And yet, if I remove all of those things, then I feel like I've thrown away something. So it's kind of like you've got 100 sesame seeds, enough to feed you a little bit for a day, but you have to search for those things and then actually work with them somehow. It's not clear. The most profound insights sometimes feel to me like that was just a kind of emotional rush to have a certain experience, but the next day, the same old depression sets in. So it's like, it's not really the same old depression, of course, but it feels like what I had was of no use. And that comes about partly by conceptualizing the experience, taking the experience and conceptualizing it, and then it feels like what felt like it was going to be really useful actually is not particularly useful, and then we feel disappointed. The only thing that wasn't useful was the conceptualization of it. Well, you eat a really nice, tasty, sweet fruit that you've never had before, you don't tend to think about it in terms of its usefulness. You know, you sit with the experience and maybe you recall the experience of it and you'd like to have that again, but you don't tend to get into the chemistry of the fruit and even whether or not it's good for you or not. It's just an experience, and a lot of the things that come up in the Dharma, the practices that we do are designed to help the experiences arise. And when we get too conceptual about it, I think it also begins to get into I don't even want to say it does, just that it can get into where we're thinking that we understand something deeper than we actually do.
I thought there was something in what you said that made me sense that, well, actually you sort of got the principle of it in terms of not something kind of like that. Something sort of made sense, but you also had some appreciation that was kind of like sort of useful in the moment, but not necessarily kind of like this ultimate explanation.
Yeah.
So that sounded like you kind of got the principle. And as I was thinking about this, the image of being on the path of driving, I think there are two pitfalls. One is that we pull over and park when we think we understand it. It's kind of like, okay, I got it now.
We think we've arrived.
We park and then we build a little hut next to the path and set up ourselves as this. What did Trumpa say? Like two-bit tin hat guru.
Two-bit tin guru. That was Trumpa's.
Yeah,
So
you know, we park and we set ourselves up like that. That's kind of the ultimate of kind of being. The other is that we can get so kind of wrought up about, oh, I shouldn't do it the wrong way, that we never put our foot on the accelerator. And in both cases, we're parked. There are different dynamics, but the kind of the wobbling ahead and getting some inspiration and getting some appreciation and inspiration to keep going. I think all those things, they work as long as you have that kind of lightness about it that you were expressing.
It's more, instead of driving and parking for whatever reason, it's more like the drunken sailor walk of a toddler.
Yeah.
With these little peripheral
All day
glimpses.
stuff.
Yeah.
The drunken sailor on the path.
actually, that's really good. So I have to repeat that story of Kala Rinpoche giving what was it? What was the empowerment that goes on for days?
Kala Chakra?
The Kala Chakra at the Japanese, I can't remember the name of the facility, but it was a big building. And he went there and he gave 3 or 4 days of empowerment. And 2,000 people went to it. And amongst those 2,000 people, because the Navy was in port and the sailors were all over the place, and because there was a marquee outside that included the announcement that, amongst other things at this empowerment, there was going to be llama dancing. So you get where it's going. And so this one sailor, and he's white and black, and he comes in and he says, "I'd like to buy a ticket." And the person at the counter says, "Okay," and she says, "Do do you have any experience with this, like empowerment song? I says, no. He says, I just saw the dancing. And I thought that sounds enjoyable. So she says, well, it's not exactly the kind of dancing. He says, I don't care, whatever it is. He says, I'm on leave, and here's the money, and he goes in, and he was in white, so I spent a lot of time like moving around behind the stage on this thing, and I could always see this white person out there. And I kept thinking, wow, it's the third day, he's still here. Like, amazing. And at the very end, this is such a great kind of interconnection thing. At the very end, everyone was lined up to come by and get the final part of the empowerment and the blessing and all. And they were all lined up. It was a big, like back and forth. I mean, a lot of people going up and by. And people were reciting the Vajrasattva mantra and all. It was really quite a beautiful time at the end. And he was right there. He was right there. And afterwards, a number of people approached him. I wasn't the only one that noticed this. A number of people approached him, and we would say, like, well, how was that? And I remember asking him that, and he said, I can't say how it was. I don't actually know how it was, but he says, I feel like my life has changed as a result of it. And so we never saw him again, I don't think. It just disappeared. But it was a great example of you never know what's going to happen, where it's going to happen. You just never know.
So there wasn't any requirement like having taken refuge to get through the door?
No, I mean, that's the kind of the nature of the Kala Chakra empowerment is that it's considered by many as the highest empowerment of all. But by virtue of being so high, you're also protected from all of these other things. And so they often don't require anything for it.
Yeah.
And I mean, in this case, it was like,
Well, maybe it was Chenrezig, it was all of them.
yeah, maybe, it's like, who knows? Who knows? So the thing though that came to mind for me was, this is also how we can be with our practice. It's like we sign up for it, sort of, or we're tricked into it, sort of, and then you just do it. You just do it, and of course, because we're all smart and we've all been educated enough so that we know how to ponder and look at and question and wonder and do all these things, but really the issue is, what am I doing? I know what I'm doing. I've been doing this and this and this. And what experiences are arising? And just to be able to like watch all of those things happen is maybe enough. Maybe that's all that's necessary. And we like it. We do more practices. It helps us overcome emotional difficulties, so we do more practice. And anyway, I've often wondered. I would love to be able to meet that guy, that sailor. I mean, now he's who knows? I mean, it's 30 years later at least. So, did something happen? I mean, is he some great teacher somewhere? what exactly is going on? Or did he just totally forget it? Can barely remember it? It's just an idle curiosity.
But even then, some kind of effect
Yeah,
occurred.
yeah, we
So even forgetting,
definitely.
he has to forget that. So something happens. It's no matter what we do,
Yeah,
nothing's lost. Totally.
I think there has to be a kind of confidence that there's something good in all of that,
Yeah.
and that there is some effect is a given. Like you just smile at someone on the street and there's an effect, and sometimes it lasts for months. So it's like something that you went to that should have been of absolutely no interest whatsoever, that you stayed there for 4 days. Even after all that time, you couldn't really say why you went or what you got. but you feel like that your life is turned in some other direction and you have no idea even what to say about that, then it leaves one curious.
This is my first time at Chenrezig, and I'm just wondering if anybody can give any advice on how to make how to make the envisioning of the images stronger. How to make that stronger or more stable.
How to make it stronger and more stable. I think one thing is so just as a matter of confession, we have done the Chenrezig practice pretty much every other month on the all-day sit for quite a few years. And at a certain point, I guess I started feeling like experimenting a little bit. And I feel like some of the experiments have gone well and others haven't. But my main interest, which didn't arise intentionally, but it just feels like, first of all, we have at least a couple of good books on Chenrezig worth looking at and reading. You can get some of the things that you might be looking for out of one of those good books. And then on top of before that and after that, getting some help, like in this context, where there's the number of people have experience with the practice of Chenrezig, and therefore what worked for one people you can hear, and then somebody else says, well, this worked for me, and then you can try those things and see how that goes. But like this morning, I felt like, what I'm personally interested in is the meaning behind it. And so then I find, generally speaking, it's more useful to teach the practice from that perspective. And my interest, without my attempting to do anything, tends to move around a bit. So it's a little bit of a smorgasbord if you just come on Chenrezig Sunday, I mean, you might get just what you need and you might not, which is why I think like Ringo Tukel's book is nice on Chenrezig, and there's at least one or two others that are even on a book price here that can be helpful. I think it's also true that none of them by themselves are going to be helpful, not deeply helpful. You really need to raise your questions and the challenges that you find, and have a little conversation with somebody, anyone who knows more than you know. That's really what it is, and gradually the pieces will come together. Much of Chenrezig, I can say with personal experience on this, most of what I personally feel I have gotten from Chenrezig and similar practices did not come from direct instruction from anybody, even though I went and got those instructions from that person. Mostly it was because early on the teachers that I had spoke no English and there was no translator. So it was very difficult to put strings of adjective and nouns together into a teaching. It just doesn't work. And yet, even in that situation, you get something from the person who's delivering it. You get more if they have a good translator, and And maybe if they're also realized in some way, you get a lot more then, potentially, but not necessarily. I think in the very beginning, we rely upon conceptual communication. And there's also behind it a sense of relationship with the person who's delivering the teaching. And we need to get all of those things kind of together so that we have a sense of it. And at some point, maybe you get teachings from somebody like the Dalai Lama, let's say, and I don't mean to say specifically and only, but somebody like that is very impressive, and you then can have a real strong sense of, I feel like I'm actually receiving these teachings from Chenrezig. And that can totally change the whole picture. And you never know, again, when that's going to happen. It's like the sailor. The sailor may have gotten the empowerment better than anybody else. Because one thing is, he walked in with a fresh mind. The rest of us may have gone in with tons of expectations based upon previous empowerments, and basically it was like a previous empowerment. I wonder what happened. So that much more. Who knows?
Part of what I'm wondering about is how important the imagery itself is to the practice, and whether it, like you said, if it needs to be, or if it's a personal thing of like where you get the meaning from. If the imagery does it for you, then maybe go with more strong visualization of that. I guess that's where my question is coming from. It's like the imagery itself, how important is that to the practice?
Well, let me say this, and then somebody else will probably have some good advice, but I think the imagery is important. So is the way you recite the mantra and your relationship to it. So is your confidence or lack thereof. There's a lot of things that are important. And in the Vajrayana, just like if you take a physics class, you have a lot of conceptual work to do, and you got mathematics to work with and a bunch of stuff. But no single part of that is really the key. And the same is true here. I think we have a lot of the tools that we use are vision tools, visualizations, pictures, you might say, but they're also meant to be living images, not just still shots in our memory and in our minds. They're meant to be like living presences. Well, most people will find that's not so easy in the beginning. That takes some work to get to that. So I think what's important we discover little by little, and we work on it. And I think that if you have a community that you work with, you're in pretty good shape. If you don't have a community that you work with, I think it's really rare for people to stick with these practices alone, like really unusual. And in my experience, I would also add, not uncommon, to spend a long time doing it and be more confused than when they started. So, you see here, it's like you raise a question or you say, this is my understanding. Somebody, if it looks like it's really out of focus, somebody's going to say, that doesn't look right. It doesn't sound right. And then we can talk about it. And there can be a sense of refining, and then also understanding that the refinement is largely conceptual. So now take that refinement and bring it to your experience, and little by little, that's the method. It's like we work at it like that. So I wouldn't say that the imagery is of primary importance, like it's above everything else. Would a blind person be able to do this practice? I think so. Why not? But I think all of the pieces are really important. And many teachers will say, and to the extent that I've had the experience, my experience is also totally in accordance with this. You can take any piece of the Dharma and discover the entire path through it. Now, not having discovered the entire path, that's my confession. But it looks to me like you take a piece of it, like the four immeasurables, the wish for beings to be free of suffering and to be happy and of the causes of happiness and your own personal sense of equanimity in relationship to all beings. This is a profound path, the immeasurables. And yet, we don't actually make that much formal use of it. Occasionally we do a retreat on it. It's not a huge piece, and yet many teachers will say, and many commentaries will say, there is no difference between any of the most profound practices and just those immeasurables. They're exactly the same. So sometimes it's good to hear that after 20 years of practice, like, whoa, I thought that was kind of a beginning practice. And now suddenly you come back to it and you look at it in an entirely different way, and things wake up out of it that didn't seem to be there before. So you make a whole chain of insights from that. Dora.
I mean, there's some different things that the visualization does, and so that's one kind of nice thing about it is it works on different things at the same time, potentially, like by resting your mind on an image, it's helping your shamatha practice. Because the image is, you have a sense of its insubstantiality, it helps you kind of get something about being and not being and how that is. Because of the meaning associated with the form, you can kind of relate and enhance your mind with dwelling on meaning, positive meanings like the four measurables, the four arms, those kind of things. So there's a lot of things that are going on, and I guess, as Michael's saying, different ones are maybe more prominent at different times, but it's kind of, just by doing it, there's something that's going to be working by putting your mind on there. And one thing they say, as far as just earlier, it sounded like you were saying, how do you do it too? The imagery has to be sort of familiar enough that you can recall it. So, like, if you can think of your mother's face, is that easy or is that hard? Well, you've seen her however many times, maybe it's, you can do that. Whereas if you haven't looked at images of Chenrezig very much, there's not going to be enough there. So even just one of the things that's suggested is just to find an image that you like and just spend some time resting your mind on that, which is not to say that you don't want to just then sort of remember a flat piece of paper or something. That becomes Chenrezig. But nonetheless, because we don't have that imagery, just sort of saturating our environment, then that can be a way to help familiarize.
That's one of the classic instructions. Going back to Padmasambhava, many teachers talk about just taking an image and just resting your attention on it and letting your eye just move through it. And then just setting it aside and just letting the image come. But it has to move from the sense of just a recollection of a flat image to a sense of the form of the image of the expression like a rainbow. That sense of appearing, yet it's not like made out of something. So that's traditional advice. So that takes some time. You actually have to sit down and do it. And there are other aspects of the practice, including the visualization of the seed syllable and all the rest. And those you can become familiar with that. It's an interesting exercise just to copy the seed syllable over and over again until it's very, very clear. So there are different exercises like that are part of it. One of the aspects of visualizing ourselves as Chenrezig, or imagining ourselves as Chenrezig, is that we imagine ourselves all the time, but we don't actually have any idea that we're actually imagining ourselves. And we have all kinds of details to that, and all kinds of sense of our history and the meaning of our inflated abilities and our diminished denigration of ourselves, and all the whole soup of our self-image that goes along with it. And so there is an element of the practice where, in seeing ourselves as Chenrezig, we can, and that the elements of the practice that begin with invoking Chenrezig and then becoming Chenrezig, that sense of appreciating that there is a way that in appearance kind of sort of similar to ours, but in appearance of a being could manifest, and the seed of it could, instead of being kind of the whole bag of karmic stuff that we have that relates to how we imagine ourselves, that the seed of it could actually be just compassion and wisdom inseparable. That the manifestation, going back to the word emanation or manifestation, that could arise just out of that. And that sidesteps kind of the process, the important process, but it sidesteps in a certain way the process of kind of trimming back all our cliche impulses, all the impulses of confused emotionality and thought, trimming them back one by one, which is something that we have to do along the way. But this kind of jumps over that. But this could actually work in a way that we do not appreciate that.
Yeah.
And this is a means to get access to that way of appreciating.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, then it is important. All the details are important, not so much because they couldn't, what's in the left hand couldn't be in the right hand. If you got that mixed up, obviously you'll never attain enlightenment. But we do have a sense of that. I know I write with my left hand, and I do this. Back left, throw right. All the rest of it. There's a whole. The particulars are important in a certain sense, just in terms of being able to hold the vividness of it.
Thank you.
Also for everyone, just on a practical level, the Wednesday evening following this, like all-day Chenrezig, is Chenrezig as usual, except Lama Michael's usually here and leads more on this next Wednesday evening. So sometimes that also comes. Another thing is just being very patient with ourselves when we approach something new. We all want too much too fast, and too much too fast is totally in the way. So just enjoy, relax, it comes.
And I will be doing something later on this year on Chenrezig practice. I think it's a series of 3 Tuesday evenings. The title of which is "Just Who Do You Think You Are?"
Really? That's great.
Yeah.
And there are brochures out there now.
Show up at your own risk.
Oh, there's brochures for the whole year's
Yeah, for the whole
teaching.
year.
It's finally on the desk there, so please, yeah.
I will say, just from today, what I did take was that it certainly seems to help with kind of imbibing this feeling of like the self being a little bit illusory, like kind of dissolving yourself in a visualization. That was something palpable that I did take away. Just kind of open your eyes and you're not quite as sure as you were before exactly who you are. But
Yeah.
Just who you think you are.
Yeah.
It really dovetails in the question that I had. In Foucault's book, he says it's in the dissolution phase. after we created this whole visual thing, he said, everything disappears and becomes completely empty, void. Nothing remains. This is not the emptiness of shunyata philosophy. It's just the disappearance of whatever we've mentally created. So, that's different than that I remember being instructed, and different than what I'm trying to do. You know, and sometimes it happens is that during the dissolution phase, I'm not just dissolving what I visualize, but I feel the dissolution of the body and the dissolution of the ordinary world. So, in my better practice. So, what does he mean by it's only what we've created it's only what we have mentally created that we dissolve?
Just we're talking about like that our selves are kind of like we're kind of constantly producing ourselves on a daily basis, the concept of us. So in a way, what else is there to dissolve? You know what I mean?
Well, is that the answer?
I don't know.
Yeah.
No.
It's,
I remember that line from Ringatulku in that book, and what exactly he means. I mean, you'll have to wait till you see him again. I think I don't want to speak for him, but I think there is a sense that can be made out of that. And I would put it in a slightly different context, so that it's not, so that we can see the relationship that we have with Chenrezig is actually pretty much the relationship we have with everything else already. And that is that we are, like Bill pointed out, we're continually creating all of the elements of our experience. And this used to be an amazing thing to say, but, you know, science in the last decade has come in full agreement with that we basically get the letter A and we instantly manufacture the entire alphabet and whole newspaper stories at the same time. And we have the experience that it's coming from somewhere else. And I think what Ringatulku is pointing at here is that we do this continually all day long. We meet people and we recognize them, right? Oh, I know that person. This is John, or this is Susan, or whatever it is. And then we think we remember, but actually we're manufacturing all the things that we think we remember. I remember she was nice, she wasn't nice, we went and had coffee, or this happened, or whatever. And actually, those things didn't happen exactly like that. If somebody had gone with a camera and a clipboard and recorded it, we would see that actually almost none of the stuff we remember is actually what happened. And yet what we do remember seems so clear that it must have happened. And so when I think about that clearly, I wonder why it was ever difficult to engage in these practices. It's so fast. Like you walk out of the room and come back in, I see you, a very complex image actually, and I instantly know who it is. And I can see you a month later and say, I know that person. It's like that. Maybe I forget the name. Maybe I forget the clothes you were wearing that day, whatever. But we just do this continually. And then when we come to the practice of Chenrezig, a relatively simple visualization, only complex because we don't ordinarily do it. But if we compare it to anything else that we work with in terms of a vision, this is like the height of simplicity. And because we can't just do it like we normally do it, we think, oh man, this is so difficult.